Alright, listen in, because if you thought the last chapter of the Claressa Shields saga was messy, what came out this week is on a completely different frequency. This is not another lightweight social media spat. This is a full-scale personal implosion, and it is unfolding out in the open while the entire boxing world is supposed to be watching a champion prepare for one of the biggest fights of her career. Instead of the road to August, we are getting security guards at a grandmother's funeral, a sister allegedly threatening to jump out of a moving car, receipts being screenshotted, live streams turning into public interrogations, and a chorus of former friends who suddenly all remembered they have something to say. And right at the center of every single one of these stories, one name keeps landing on the timeline: Claressa Shields. Here's what's happening, and I need you to sit with this one, because the layers get uglier the deeper you go. The internet has been circulating a running list of nicknames for Claressa Shields that already tells you where the culture is on this story. Depending on which corner of the timeline you scroll into, you'll see her being called Papoose's alleged mistress, his so-called entanglement, his pick-me, and in some of the harsher corners, the side chick in a marriage that never even legally ended. That's the framing the public has decided on. Even Cris Cyborg jumped into the mix with a comment that basically opened the door for everyone else to speak on it. And once Cris said her piece, the floodgates cracked wide open. What used to be whispered in comment sections is now the loudest conversation surrounding Claressa Shields, and it has almost nothing to do with the ring anymore. By now most of you can already tell, the way Claressa Shields has been moving lately has left even her longtime defenders scratching their heads. She still has fans who will show up for her at every turn. She still has supporters who insist she deserves non-stop praise, more endorsements, more magazine covers, and every award that boxing is willing to hand out. And on the pure athletic score sheet, they are not wrong. Claressa Shields is one of the most decorated women in the history of the sport. That part is not up for debate. What is up for debate is everything happening outside the ropes, and that's the part that keeps snowballing. Pay attention to what got said here, because it changes the whole shape of the story. I already covered the earlier allegation that Claressa Shields reportedly had security present at her grandmother's funeral, and that this security was allegedly used to keep Shalita from paying her final respects. That alone was enough to send the internet into a spiral. But the reporting that followed added an even messier layer. Apparently there was also internal disagreement inside the family over who was supposed to be handling the funeral expenses in the first place. Now, listen, that piece is family business. It's not my business, it's not your business, and it's certainly not the kind of thing anyone outside that home should be dissecting. But here's the twist, because Claressa Shields chose to go on live and address a version of it herself, the private matter became public property. Once you put it on the microphone, you don't get to complain that it's on the timeline. And this is where it turns. Bre's side stepped in with her perspective, and the way she put it hit different. She essentially said Claressa Shields should have simply allowed Shalita to say a goodbye to her grandmother without the extra choreography. Bre asked the question everyone was already thinking: why did security even need to be involved at what should have been the softest, most human moment on that day? From the outside, it almost looked like Claressa Shields expected a confrontation to break out at that funeral. Some observers wondered whether she genuinely thought Bre and Shalita were going to spark something in a room full of mourners. Maybe that's why the security was already posted at the entrance. Maybe. I can't sit here and say I know for a fact, but the entire optic reads uncomfortable, and no amount of spin fixes that visual. Then Claressa Shields hopped on yet another live stream, and once again, instead of the conversation being about the August fight, the conversation became about the drama. Honestly, I thought by now the tone would be all footwork, all conditioning, all camp updates. I thought we'd be hearing about sparring partners and weight targets. Instead we're hearing about who threw whose luggage, who cancelled whose flight, and whether Bre was almost stepping out of a moving vehicle. It really does feel like Claressa Shields runs toward conflict rather than away from it. Some athletes recharge in silence. Claressa recharges on live. And here's the part that made a lot of viewers uncomfortable: Bre's children were reportedly right there when the conversation went sideways. Just picture that for a second. Picture kids in earshot while a public figure with hundreds of thousands of followers is dragging their mother in real time. Whatever your take on the adults involved, there's really no clean way to defend that scene. Now the original plan, from what's been reported, was for Bre to fly back to Atlanta with Claressa Shields after the funeral. That did not happen. Whether Claressa cancelled the flight, whether Bre pulled the plug at the last minute, or whether the sister simply decided she wanted to stay in Flint longer, the accounts are still being pieced together. What we do know is Bre eventually went live to tell her own side. And according to Bre, she never wanted to make the trip alone in the first place, she wanted her kids with her from the start. That's the detail that keeps getting overlooked in this whole cycle. From Bre's telling, Claressa Shields was willing to fund Bre's ticket, but not the tickets for the children. That is where the cracks started to widen. The story doesn't line up on paper once you stack the claims side by side. Claressa Shields said Bre tried to jump out of a moving vehicle. Bre said Claressa threw her belongings out of the car and then publicly discussed spending around $1,300 to change a flight. Bre's sister reportedly clapped back saying if that kind of money was floating around for airfare, it might have been more useful applied to fixing the car she was actually driving. And once money entered the conversation, the whole thing collapsed into something no one was going to walk away clean from. Claressa Shields then reportedly pushed back with the classic script: she pays for the townhouse, she covers the bills, she handles this expense, she handles that expense, and nobody asked Bre to do certain things. Bre's sister was reportedly tired of hearing money weaponized every time the family disagreed. And that is precisely the fracture line critics have been pointing to for a long time. The moment your generosity turns into a receipt you keep pulling out during arguments, it stops being generosity. It becomes a scoreboard. Shifting gears for a second, because this next part is what turned the whole conversation into a case study on how Claressa Shields keeps ending up in the same cycle. She reportedly responded by saying this is exactly why she no longer talks to certain relatives, and even suggested that Shalita was never that close to the family to begin with. But this is where the story trips over its own logic. If Shalita truly wasn't close, how does she know so much of the family's history? Why do mutual relatives and longtime friends still line up with her version of events? You can't call someone a stranger and then get upset that the stranger knows the address. Either she was close enough to be involved, or she was distant enough that her comments shouldn't sting, and clearly, something is stinging. And this is where the receipts on Claressa Shields become impossible to ignore. This isn't a first offense. This is a pattern. The claims that support has been used as leverage have followed Claressa Shields for a while. Similar concerns were raised around her connection to Jada the boxer, and around others in her circle. There have been repeated accusations that financial help came with conditions about who you could talk to, what you could post, what side you were expected to take. On this most recent live, the same concerns resurfaced, this time reportedly aimed at her own sister. Claressa Shields was accused of warning her sister that one more misstep could mean being completely cut off. That is a heavy sentence when the person on the other end of it is family. And genuinely, this is where I struggle with the approach. If the help is real, the help doesn't need terms and conditions. The moment support comes packaged with expectations about loyalty, obedience, silence, or approved friendships, the whole relationship becomes transactional. And once it becomes transactional, it's already broken, the relatives just haven't announced it yet. You can't buy adult loyalty and then be shocked when the adults would rather struggle than perform it. Here's the moment that pulled it all together for a lot of viewers. Bre reportedly said she would rather take a Greyhound bus home than spend one more day feeling like she owed something over a $1,300 flight change. Read that back to yourself. A grown woman with children would rather ride a bus across state lines than keep sitting under a favor she never asked to be measured by. That is not a woman being petty. That is a woman choosing peace over comfort, and that decision speaks louder than anything Claressa Shields has said on stream. And this is where it turns for the worse, because Claressa Shields, whether she meant to or not, said the quiet part out loud. She said that nobody in her family and none of her former friends were ever going to become the next viral success story off her name. She said they wouldn't earn more than a few dollars posting about her on Facebook. Now let me put this delicately. Nobody in that family sounds like they are chasing a follower count. Nobody sounds like they're gunning for a podcast deal. The critique isn't that they want fame, the critique is that Claressa Shields only seems to make room for the people around her when the arrangement benefits her. Eventually, even the most patient people in your corner grow tired of proving they were never in it for the wrong reasons. And here's the twist nobody saw coming: the pattern doesn't stop at family. The pattern extends across her entire professional orbit. Look at the arc with Laila Ali, who was reportedly positioned to mentor Claressa Shields and help open doors in the business side of women's boxing before that relationship reportedly frayed into public jabs. Look at the reported breakdowns with Franchon Cruz, with Alicia Baumgartner, with Shadasia Green, women who were once considered part of the wave alongside her and who no longer share a room with her. Look at the reported charity flare-ups, the whispers about donations being withheld over personal beef with a parent. Look at the number of former friends who have now spoken publicly after the friendship ended. Look at the recurring allegations of burner accounts, coordinated pile-ons, and social media campaigns designed to shape a narrative. When one relationship falls apart, that's a moment. When 10 relationships fall apart in similar patterns, that is a signature. So when Claressa Shields tells the timeline that nobody's going to build a career off her name, I have to gently disagree. Nobody is trying to become famous off Claressa Shields. People are talking because Claressa Shields keeps handing the internet material. One week it's a live stream. The next week it's a receipt. The next week it's a moving vehicle story. The next week it's a funeral. You can't broadcast your life at that volume and then get upset that people are tuning in. Now let me hit the part that I think really cost her some of the sympathy she used to hold. There is reporting that at the exact same window when a close relative was in hospice, Claressa Shields was documenting a vacation in Aruba, the resort, the ocean, the outfits, live streams from paradise. Now listen, nobody is saying an athlete isn't allowed a vacation. Rest is part of the sport. But the optic of one live stream celebrating luxury while another storyline reports a loved one in their final chapter, that is a collision the audience does not forget. Critics believe the funeral did not unfold the way Claressa Shields anticipated, and now the frustration is being redirected outward. Critics believe the strategy, whatever it was meant to be, completely misfired. And critics believe the reason she's upset is not the loss itself but the loss of control over how the story was going to be told. Family conflict during funerals is unfortunately common. But the wake, the service, the repast, those are the moments where every grown adult in the room agrees to postpone the drama for a few hours. That is the unspoken rule. And a lot of viewers feel that Claressa Shields could not, in that moment, put her pride down long enough to observe it. Some of them have gone as far as saying she treats the people around her like NPCs, like characters she can move, mute, or bench depending on how they behave. Real life will humble you off that mindset quickly. Financial help does not equal ownership. It never has. And this is where I want to zoom in on the part that hurts the most, because there are children involved in this story. When people start talking about cutting off support, the follow-up questions get very serious very fast. Is a mother and her children being asked to move out of the townhouse? Are they being pushed back to Michigan? Are they being placed in a position where they have to choose between their own peace and a roof? These are not entertainment questions anymore. These are life questions. And here's the layer critics keep circling. Shalita reportedly predicted months ago that a major fallout with Claressa's sister was on the horizon. She reportedly said that the moment things stopped going Claressa's way, financial support would be the first pressure point. That's not luck, that's pattern recognition from someone who knew the room. Other high-profile figures with complicated families have gone the opposite direction, they've quietly distanced themselves and stopped feeding a public narrative. Claressa Shields, according to critics, keeps needing family visible, because the family is part of the image. And the more these public blow-ups keep happening, the fewer relatives are going to be willing to keep standing in that spotlight. Alright, breath check, because I need you to hear this next section clearly. The cycle looks like this. Someone in Claressa Shields' orbit sympathizes with Shalita. Someone questions whether the funeral security was necessary. Someone brings up the vacation timing. Suddenly the flight changes. Suddenly the luggage flies. Suddenly the money gets mentioned. Suddenly a new fallout is public. Critics argue Claressa Shields spends more energy dismantling people on the way out than she ever spent nurturing the relationship on the way in. Critics argue that accountability is always outsourced and never absorbed. And in the middle of all of this, she is supposed to be locked in for the biggest fight window of her year. Where is the focus? Genuinely, where is it going? And this is where the emotional load hits, because this is still, at the end of the day, the same Claressa Shields that fans wanted to make the face of women's boxing. This is the same Claressa Shields that people wanted on cereal boxes, on network commercials, on the front of every magazine dedicated to the sport. She earned those achievements in a ring. Nobody's taking that from her. But a lot of the attention she is pulling right now, if we are being honest, isn't coming from championship rounds. It's coming from a public entanglement with a married man. It's coming from Remy Ma addressing the situation and every blog running with the follow-up. Claressa Shields, your fights come and go. Championship belts get defended and lost and defended again. But the story that keeps trending, month after month, isn't a title fight. It's a live stream. And that is a distinction the algorithm and the audience are both picking up on. The comment sections are pulling apart in real time. Some people are absolutely holding the line for Claressa Shields, saying she is being over-scrutinized, saying the internet has decided to punish her, saying every mistake becomes a headline because of who she chose to date. Others are saying enough is enough, that a champion of this caliber shouldn't be spending fight camp defending herself against relatives on Instagram Live. And a third group, honestly the loudest lately, is just tired. Tired of the cycle. Tired of the receipts. Tired of watching a woman with a legacy this loud spend it on skirmishes this small. Alright, breath check one more time, because I know how much I just dropped on you, and I want to hear where you land. Are you team, leave her alone, she's grieving, she's stressed, and the internet is piling on? Are you team, she has to look in the mirror because the pattern is the pattern? Or are you somewhere in the middle, recognizing her greatness in the ring while also refusing to look away from what's playing out in the family? Drop it below, because this comment section is doing more storytelling than half the podcasts covering this. And this next detail deserves your reaction too, the reported argument in the moving vehicle. One account says someone was trying to step out. Another account says belongings were being thrown out. Either way, that ride did not end with the two of them returning to Atlanta on the same plane. Claressa Shields' sister was reportedly left figuring out how to get back home to her own children. Another flight was reportedly available, but according to her, she was so worn out from being reminded of what Claressa Shields had funded that she was ready to take literally any other route home. Bus. Train. Rideshare. Anything. When a person tells you their peace of mind is worth more than a plane ticket, that is not an insult, that is a diagnosis of the entire relationship. Zoom out for a second and this is what you're really looking at. A world champion boxer who should be dominating every headline for her sport is instead dominating headlines for her personal life. A woman with generational talent is spending prime years relitigating family arguments on public streams. A career that should be sponsored by every major brand in fitness is instead being co-branded with the ongoing entanglement conversation. And a family that should be circling around her in her biggest year is reportedly splintering, one Greyhound at a time. Whatever you believe about the details, that is the shape of the story. And the shape of the story is what the audience remembers. So where do we go from here? Because let's be honest, the fight in August is not going to pause for any of this. The scale is going to hit. The cameras are going to hit. The weigh-in is going to hit. And if the last few weeks are any indication, more receipts are on the way before that first bell. Whether Claressa Shields corrects course, mends fences, and lets her fists do the closing statement, or whether the pattern repeats one more time and another close relationship ends in a live stream, is genuinely the question none of us can answer yet. But if you have watched this cycle as long as I have, you already know which way the wind usually blows. That's the temperature check for today. I'll catch you on the next drop. Tell me in the comments who you believe in this saga, because the loyalty lines here are wilder than the story itself. And if you want the full unpacking of the moving vehicle argument, the sister ultimatum, and the Aruba timeline broken down piece by piece, that next breakdown is already loading, you'll want to be there for it.